Yeah, so if we actually put a breakpoint in our code, we looked at the runtime debugger last week. When we want to put a breakpoint in and examine the code, then we need to use start debugging so that those breakpoints get hit when those lines of code execute. So if we put a breakpoint in order to see what's happening, then we'd want to press play or start debugging. But again, once we're done debugging, we've got to start the server again, because as soon as we turn it off to make changes, server's dead, we got to turn it back on. So now our server should be back online. Oh, I guess I have to press debug and start without debugging again. So it'll rebuild. And we're back up. So now we could make changes to the C#, build, and refresh. We don't have to stop and start the server again. These port numbers you can also change. The way Visual Studio is set up is it will randomly assign a port to every project. So this means if you're working on two different applications, you can have two instances of Visual Studio running. Each one of them is going to run on a different port, so you can run them simultaneously. If you want to change this port, you want to say, you know what, this number is going to be a pain for me to remember. I want to type it. I want it to be something simple, like I want it to run on port 500. We can go into the properties of any project here. So here's our web project. So our solution contains, like I said, two projects. Here's our web application. Here's our unit testing projects, which I'll just kind of contract. We're not going to look at that for a while. So if I select my music store project and choose properties, a lot of the configuration settings are here. So if we want to change the version of the .NET framework to say a lower version, maybe our server doesn't support, our web server isn't running the latest version, so we can downgrade that if we want. So we've got compile options here, and under web, here's the URL. So if you want to hard code in a port you prefer, you can do that here and save those changes, and then it will run there. We also can set a specific page or URL every time we launch the application, what that start page should be. So a whole bunch of configuration options through the property sheet. And if you make changes, you just save them here. Typically, I just kind of leave this stuff at the default most of the time. All right. Notice also, remember we picked for authentication, we changed the authentication in our project setup. We changed it from none to individual user accounts. So Visual Studio generated these links. It created inside of views, it created an account subfolder. And it created all of these views that are functional, that are related to user authentication. So they've automated a lot of this work for us because they know there's a good chance we want authentication. We're going to need at least some of those features. So they've pre-built this stuff. So here's our, forgot password page, for example. They've given it to us. So there's register, there's login. Now they didn't give us pages or any kind of user interface for using the social media login, but they've included libraries for us to call if we want. And they say, if you want to do it, here's how to set up external auth. Go read this article, follow the steps. And we can even see the libraries that they included under the project references. Down here, you can see there's libraries for Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, NoAuth. And there are others we can add if you want. Let's say you want to allow GitHub sign-on. You're building an application for developers. Well, there's a library here. We could just go and add it if we want. So all of these references, everything that gets listed here, if we have a look at our project folder, we can kind of see how this all gets structured. So we've got one folder for our web application, one folder for our unit test project, and this packages folder. This contains all of the reference DLLs from the framework. Now, we don't necessarily need all of these. When we set our project up, right, we picked MVC template. So when you pick MVC template, it gives you all of this stuff, which is like 40 or 50 megabytes. If you might, some developers say, you know what, I really only want like 3 or 4 of these. In that case, you're almost better to pick the empty option and manually add the libraries and packages you want. So that kind of reduces some of the bloat in your code. Now, what I want to do, we have our application running. I want to put it up on GitHub, but we have a particular kind of git ignore file we want to use for these projects, and here's why. If we don't include a git ignore, what's the problem? I mean, we can push this entire thing to GitHub and it's functional, but it's not really a good idea. Why not? Adam?
A bunch of bloated libraries end up on GitHub.
Yep. Okay.
With configure files, password.
Yep. Okay. So we're putting all this stuff up on GitHub. We don't really need them. We don't need them up there. It makes our repository a lot bigger, makes our commits slower. The problem I found yesterday. If we include all this stuff and we push to GitHub, Azure already has all these libraries. So if we try and deploy a repository that looks like this to Azure, we get DLL, we get reference conflicts because Azure has their own version of these files, and yet we're including our own. So we've got 2 versions of the same DLLs, which causes a problem. So when I tried to deploy, I pushed everything to GitHub, tried to deploy to Azure, didn't work. And because it was giving me all these reference conflicts. When I published straight to Azure from Visual Studio without this stuff, it worked fine. So the workaround for this is for us to create a specific git ignore here, which will exclude this stuff. So here are the steps we're gonna make. There's a particular Visual Studio git ignore file. I've actually put it on Blackboard for you. So in Tools and Resources, you can download this file. I'll show you where I got it. You can get it straight from GitHub, but I've put it on Blackboard. Yeah, this is it. So this is actually from GitHub itself. Here is the git ignore file they recommend you use with Visual Studio Solutions because it excludes a lot of stuff. And one of the things that it excludes, a lot of this stuff isn't really relevant to us, but the big one that is relevant, so if you have an Azure publishing profile, it doesn't get pushed to Git, which is good. So here, the packages. So Azure includes a package restore. It looks at the dependencies of your application and it automatically pulls them in for you. So Azure will take care of that. So what I put on Blackboard is just this file. So here's what I suggest you do. Just right click this link. It's at the bottom of Tools and Resources. Just save it to your project directory. So right here, where this folder is, just save the file. You don't have to modify it. So whenever you're creating a .NET application you're going to deploy to GitHub, I recommend copy this Git file. Even before you initialize Git in the folder, do this first. I tried adding this after I'd already initialized the repository and it still gave me problems. So it's probably a good first step is put this git ignore in your local solution. So it should be in the same folder where your .sln file is. That's your Visual Studio solution file. Now we should theoretically be able to push this stuff up to GitHub from Visual Studio. It's a bit flaky. Sometimes it works great. I had people in class yesterday who it worked fine, and I wound up having to use the command line. So let's go to GitHub now. Let's create an empty repository online, and then I'll show you a couple ways we can push this stuff up to GitHub. And then we'll try and push it to connect it to Azure later in the class. So go to GitHub. And make a new repository. As I said, I'm only going to make one repository for all the lesson files. So every week there'll just be a new commit in this same repository. I would suggest making yours private because eventually we're going to be adding your database connection string, probably not this week. Obviously, I have to leave mine public. It's not much use to you guys if it isn't public, which means my database connection string is going to be in the repository. Please don't destroy my database, right? The code's there so I can teach you guys, teach my other classes. So yes, that'll get published because it needs to go on there when I do continuous deployment. Someone said yesterday, well, can't we just exclude the database connection string? Well, I can't because once I deploy it to Azure, it deploys from GitHub. If my connection isn't on GitHub, my connection doesn't go on Azure. My website, live website, won't connect to a database. So I'll just don't use the README or the git ignore. We already have the git ignore, so just click create, but make yours private. Now I'm going to try again to do this through Visual Studio. If it doesn't work, I'll have to remove my repository and go the command line route. So you can go the command line route, just following those instructions and just change add readme to add dot. That'll work. I may wind up having to go this route. So once your repository is set up, just click the copy button to copy the URL from your repo. Or you can just copy it from the address bar in the browser, doesn't matter. Same address. Anybody need me to repeat any of those steps or going?
I'm just curious, what folder was it dropped in for the ignore? I'm sorry.
No problem. So the root folder of your application. So it will contain your .sln file as well as the two folders for the project and packages. So wherever you've saved your project, that folder, whatever the location on your computer is. If you're not sure, Alex, if you're not sure where it is, in Solution Explorer, just click on the solution at the top. And down here, if you hover over the path in the properties, it'll show you the directory path. So to try to put this up on GitHub, we're going to click Team Explorer. Now, as someone pointed out yesterday, there's also a GitHub extension for Visual Studio, which you can install. Now, I've installed it twice, and for some reason, it won't install. It doesn't give me errors, but it doesn't install. If you want, a couple students in yesterday's class said, we're using the GitHub extension for Visual Studio, works great. I'll show you where to get it. You can try it. If you install it, you have to restart Visual Studio to activate it. I tried it yesterday. I tried it again today. Still doesn't show up for me. Your extensions are here. So you don't have to do this, but you can try it if you want. You go to Tools and Extensions and Updates. And this is totally optional. You don't have to do this. If you click on Online, you can search for GitHub. I've already tried downloading this extension twice. It shows it's downloaded, it's done, yet I get the extension keeps asking me to install it. Some students said this worked fine for them. So if you want, you can download it. Doesn't take very long. Once it downloads, it'll say, give you a message saying you need to restart Visual Studio in order to activate the extension. If you want to try that, you can. You don't need to. I'm curious if this works for anybody or if you get the same result I do. I can wait a couple minutes if anybody wants to give this a try. I'll kind of take a pause. You don't need it. We can do it through Team Explorer. That's the way I'm going to try it. If that doesn't work, I'm going to use the good old command line. So the students who were using this yesterday said once they downloaded it and restarted Visual Studio and reopened their project, when they went to Team Explorer, it had a GitHub plugin here where they could connect. For some reason on mine, that doesn't seem to play very nicely. But if you try it, I'm curious, somebody let me know if it works for you or not. Nope, not there for you, Jake. Okay, that's fine. We've got options. It's one of the good things about Visual Studio. There's often many different ways to accomplish something. You still getting errors creating your project?
My VMware only allows a certain amount of space, and I've already reached that.
Can you increase the size of that?
I'm currently trying to figure that out.
Okay. If you need help, William, you can also email. You need help getting the environment set up. You can email Greg, our computer studies technician. Do you have his email?
Yes.
The CS Tech. So Greg can also help you if you're having issues getting the environment configured properly. Anybody's GitHub extension work? Still downloading?
Still trying.
Okay.
Be command line inbuilt into Visual Studio, right?
You could, again, you got options. There's a command line in Visual Studio. Yeah, you could use that. Or you can just use like the Windows command line. Go really old school. That's my style. Start, run, CMD.
I figured out what's happening with the Visual Studio GitHub extension.
Yeah.
So when you close it, there's a window that pops up and you have to let it finish. It's like a VSIX installer.
Yes, it does bring up the VSIX installer. That's the Visual Studio extension installer. I got that one this morning, saw it, let it finish, and it still is prompting me to download it and doesn't show. Do you see it now, Jake? Like if you go to Team Explorer?
No, I don't, but like it's running through the VSIX installer, which I didn't actually like before. So.
Okay, all right. I'm sure the problem is me. Normally the Visual Studio extensions are fairly straightforward to install. I'll just close this window for now. I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, I got GitHub.
You did? All right, maybe on my break I'll try it again.
You want me to see if I can try installing that first?
Well, okay, all right. I guess I'll give it one more try. Maybe the third time's a charm, right? We'll try one more time. Excuse me. Jake, when I start messing up the process, you stop me, okay?
Yep.
Okay. My changes are scheduled, and so you restarted at this point?
Yeah, so close it and then close Visual Studio. So it should be like a screen that pops up. You restart it. Like if you restart Visual Studio.
Yeah, then it'll come up.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, maybe that's why. Started Visual Studio. Let's see. Maybe. Was yours blank like this, or did you see the VSIX?
No, I saw the VSIX. I mentioned one blue.
I don't have the world's best feeling about this, but let's see if it's actually even running. It's not even running. All right. All right. So I will leave that for now. Reopen my project.
Command line's the best.
Well, you can try through here, which you not always. So to get our stuff up on GitHub, we go to Team. So normally we're here. So just load Team Explorer and click Home. Now we may need to make a change before it allows us, because we're gonna have to make a commit, but we probably will need to change something somewhere in the project. We'll see. If I click on changes, yeah, it says there's no unstaged changes. So I'll just go to my layout where we change the title to MVC Music Store. I'll change the title up here on line 6 as well, right? So this is the title that appears at the top of our browser tab. So I'll change that to also say MVC Music Store. And now it's showing me I've got one change. So now this commit button is enabled. And if I click the drop down, not only can I commit, I can do a commit and push in one operation. I can also choose commit and sync. What do you think the difference is between sync and push? They're similar, but not exactly the same.
Push won't be as won't run parallel. Sync would.
Good guess. Not quite. Push is going to do one thing. Sync is going to do two things. If we're syncing our local copy with a GitHub repository. Yeah, sync will do a pull and then a push. In what scenario would we be better off to use sync? For now, we're safe to use push. But there's some scenario where we're better off to use sync. When would we want to use sync instead of push? Yeah, we're working with somebody else. So Adam and I are working together. Before I put changes on GitHub, I want to make sure I've got his changes and we don't have a conflict. So clicking sync will do a pull first and then it will do a push. So I'll click commit and push. My commit should work. My push isn't going to work yet because we haven't connected it up to any kind of remote repository yet. So I'll click commit and push. Ask me if I want to save. Yes. Another Git process is already running here. Interesting. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go the command line route. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to Windows and get the directory. And I'll just copy that address, because I need to enter this directory at my command prompt. So I'll just go to my root folder, copy that. And I'll open up a command prompt and change directories and just paste in that folder. So if you've been in my class before, well, you've probably used Git from the command prompt before. If you haven't been in my class before, maybe a lot of you, talking to my students yesterday, many of them had never used it from the command prompt. So it's probably a good idea to see how this works. I'm going to reinitialize Git here. Git. So now I want to add all of my files to be tracked by Git, except any of the ones in the Git ignore. So packages gets ignored. Ever paid attention to the code when you create a repository? These are basically the commands we're going to run. Initialize Git in our local folder. Instead of add readme, we use add dot. Dot means all files, except the ones that we're ignoring. So I'll type git add dot and hit enter. This should add about 90 files or so to be tracked by Git. If we didn't use the git ignore, it would track almost 600 files. So we've added the files to be watched by Git. Now we'll make our first commit. And again, it gives us the code right here. So I'm just following. Git commit -m for message. Start of music store, lesson 2. I'll make another commit at the end of class, so that commit message will be like end of lesson 2. So if you want to browse the archive at either place, those commit messages will tell you what the archive is. So now I've got a local commit, my local repository, though it's not connected to this yet. They're still totally independent. There's an empty online repository. I just have a local one that GitHub's Git's watching for changes. So now I need this command. I need to use this remote add origin. So in effect, I would need to connect my local repository to this one on GitHub. So I can type that command, or you can just, to reduce typos, I'll just copy that and paste it in and hit enter. Takes a second. Now they're linked. And now I just need to do a push. So upload all the files that I'm tracking on Git. Git push -u for unconditional. We really only need to do that on our first push. After that, we can just type git push origin master. So this should upload all, I think it's, like I said, I think it's 88 files when we use git ignore in our project. And now when I refresh my repository, actually I'll do it in a new tab so we can still see those instructions. Oh, not quite done yet. Using the command line is actually, it's a little more work, but we actually have a good deal more control because we can do things like if we screw up our online repository, we can remove our local and we can disconnect it and then connect it up to another repository. So it says it's done now. So now when I refresh my repository online, well, this is interesting. Why did it include our packages? It wasn't supposed to. Ah, this is why. The file name, notice it's supposed to say .gitignore, but when I saved it, took the dot out. So we're going to have to redo this. That's okay. We'll do it again. So I'm going to blow away my repository, disconnect all of it, do it all again. That's all right. It's a learning process. So to delete my repository, I want to get rid of this entirely. I'm going to take that name and go into the repository settings and we'll blow it away. I guess I should have confirmed that our git ignore was okay before I did this. Okay, so the repository's gone. Now our local still thinks it's connected to that repository that no longer exists. So we want to remove the remote here as well, which is git remote. I'll just double check the command. There we go. Git remote RM, so remove. So disconnect our local repository so it's no longer tied to any remote repository. Oh, sorry, git remote remove I think it's origin. So now if we check git remote -v, there's no remote here. So it's not tied to anything on GitHub anymore. Now we need to deal with this file that says git ignore. It needs to be .gitignore. Windows won't allow us to rename it that way. So here's our trick. We'll open up this file in some kind of text editor. So Notepad, WordPad, whatever text editor you have on your machine. Just open the file up. I'll open it up in Sublime. And I'm just going to click Save As and make sure it's called, your text editor should allow you to save it with the name .gitignore. So just put a dot in front of it. I don't need to change the file. I'm just doing Save As. So now I have two, the .gitignore, which is the correct version, and the one that just says gitignore as a file. I'll delete that one. Because Windows just won't allow you to rename. So just open it up in any text editor, save it as .gitignore. And then we get to try the whole process again. One other thing. You have this little Git folder here. We need to delete it because that has all the old stuff, the old commits. So get rid of your Git folder. When we re-add it, that folder will get regenerated. So we now have the .gitignore, the file just called gitignore is gone, and the Git folder is gone from our directory as well. So your directory should look like this. So we've removed the remote, deleted that repository off of GitHub. Now we should be able to reinitialize Git locally. So once again, let's run the command git init. If Git was watching the repository before, we're saying, forget all the old stuff and start again. So it says initialized empty repository. Had we left the Git folder here, it would have said reinitialized, which we didn't want. We wanted to kind of undo all traces of what we had done previously without a trace. So it's like we're starting again. So now we got to go back to GitHub and make the new repository again. And we'll follow the instructions again. Only thing as good as doing them once for learning is doing it twice, right? So I'll go back to GitHub. I'll make a new repository again. And just to be sure, I'm going to give it a different name. I suggest naming it something different so that GitHub doesn't try bringing the old stuff into this one, merging it. So make a brand new repository with a different name, make it private, and we'll click create. And then we'll just follow those few commands that it displays on screen. So we've done step one, which is git init. We've already done that. We've initialized GitHub locally. So I'll just sort of scroll up here and we'll follow the other commands. So git init we've done. Git add dot instead of git add readme. That should add all the files we are not ignoring. Hopefully it doesn't add as many files this time. That our git ignore should work because we've named it properly this time. So just run the command git space add space dot. Then we'll try the third command. We'll make a commit, git commit -m. Lesson 2. This is a good sign. It's shorter, which indicates it's probably not bringing in all the files we want to ignore. And then the last two, we'll try and connect it up again to our repository, and then we'll try pushing. So I'll just paste in that fourth command. And then I can just run the fifth command, git push -u origin master. Yes, so that ran much faster, and before it said 400 some odd objects. This time we only have 95 objects, which suggests that the git ignore has worked properly this time. So if we check our repository, our packages folder should be excluded this time. There, that's better. This is what we want on GitHub. We don't want that like 50 megs worth of packages copied here. So the command line is fairly straightforward as long as we do two things. One of which I did and one of which I didn't do. The first one is that we create the git ignore properly. I messed that one up. The second thing we do, which I did manage, is just follow the commands. And just change readme to dot. That's it. Other than that, you can copy and paste from here into your command prompt. We won't have to set this up again. We're set up now. We're not going to create other repositories for this, although you will need to do it for your assignments. You will need to create a repository and post them. In fact, what I'm going to recommend for your assignments is rather than creating a new repository for every assignment, it probably may even make sense to just make one folder and then commit the different assignments to different subfolders. But I have to think about how that will work with Azure. That may or may not work. I'll have to think that one through. So I'm not going to do it through Visual Studio. I'm going to use the command line. So at the end of class, I only have to run. Which commands will I need to run at the end of class? Won't need to do all of this. A few of these things I won't need to do. What will we need to do from these instructions? We'll need to do one more. We'll need to commit, we'll need to push, but what do you have to do before you can commit? Right, we'll have to run the add, so it will add any new files or files we've changed, Then we'll make an end of class commit and then we'll push. We don't need to do init again. That was a one-time only thing. We don't need to add the remote again. That was also a one-time only for setup. But anytime we want to put new changes on GitHub, we'll add dot, we'll commit with a new message, and we'll push. Then our code's online. Questions before we take a break? Sorry, I had to do that twice. I wasn't designed to confuse you, but I'm hoping me messing up the git ignore file will help you learn.
That's what it is. That's the story.
That's just a silver lining. I would have preferred to do it right the first time, as long as we get it right eventually. If there are no questions at this point, and I will go through the process, I will do another commit at the end of class, so we'll go through this one more time, because I'll put the end of class files up. Joel, you have a question?
I'm gonna have to post this on Azure today.
We're going to try. If we don't get it up there, it's not the end of the world, but I'll go through the process, yes, so that you can see how it works. Okay, it's 12:15. This is probably a good place for us to take a break. I'll stop the video stream. The video is online, will be online now, so you can watch it again. Watch the last part of the video. It's better than the first part of the video. And we'll come back at 12:35.